43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Just before we go to questions without notice, I just want to, at the outset of question time, inform the House that the Right Honourable David Carter, Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Parliament of New Zealand, is here on the floor. Great to see you here. I had the pleasure of visiting you in New Zealand last year. He's here with Mr David Wilson, the Clerk of the House, and of course His Excellency Mr Chris Seed, the High Commissioner. On behalf of the House, a very, very warm welcome. I might look to you for inspiration over the next hour and 10 minutes. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last Thursday, the Fair Work Commission made a decision to cut the take-home pay of nearly 700,000 Australians. What is the Prime Minister going to do to stop this pay cut?
Yeah. The Prime Minister has the call. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the decision last Thursday couldn't have come as a surprise to the Leader of the Opposition, because he was single-handedly responsible for Fair Work Commission just considering the whole issue of penalty rates. It was his decision to ask Fair Work to deal with it, and he made that decision. And he appointed the commissioners. So it was entirely the work of the Leader of the Opposition. And we know, of course, when he was asked by Neil Mitchell in April last year whether he would accept and support the decision of the independent umpire, he said, "I will. I'll accept them." He said, even if they reduce Sunday penalty rates, said Mitchell. Well, I said, I'd accept the independent tribunal, and that makes a big difference between us and the Liberals. Well, Mr Speaker, right, what we see here is an issue that underlines the lack of integrity, the lack of consistency, the pure hypocrisy of the Leader of the Opposition. What about this in 2012? It's a wonderful video, Mr Speaker. It's Meet the Press. I think the best way, said the Leader of the Opposition, to protect Fair Work Australia is to protect its independence. It's a statutory body. It's doing its investigations. And the argument which says that the government needs to intervene would undermine its independence. It's an independent body. Well, that's a bold statement, hard to connect to the remarks we just heard. But, Mr Speaker, it gets even.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Just before I call the Leader of the Opposition, members on both sides will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House, the Minister for Trade and Investment, the Minister for Energy and the Environment, again regrettably. The level of interjections is too high on both sides. We've only been away a week. Everyone has very good memories. I'm not going to keep repeating what I said the last sitting week. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
On relevance, the Prime Minister should stop worrying about me. Will he stop a pay cut to 700,000 ordinary Australians?
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Not only was the Leader of the Opposition responsible for Fair Work conducting this inquiry,
Member for Isaacs,
but in 2013, together with Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and Treasurer Chris Bowen, the Leader of the Opposition, then the Minister for Education and Workplace Relations Reform, promised that a Rudd Labor government would provide funding of $400,000 over 2 years to COSBOA, that's the small business organisation, to participate in the 4-year review of modern awards due to start next year. This ensures that small business has appropriate representation in those proceedings. Now, Mr Speaker, what did they imagine the small business organisation would be saying? Did they think COSBOA would be saying those penalty rates are too low, they've got to go up? Did they think they'd say they should stay the same? Of course not. He started the review. He appointed the commissioners. He defended its independence. And then he was going to pay the small business lobby to argue for the reduction of Sunday penalty rates. Well, he'd know a lot about that. From one EBA to another, he did it to the members of the AWU again and again.
The member for Tangney.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on how recent visits from world leaders have strengthened Australia's relationship with Indonesia and Israel? How did these visits help deliver more opportunities for Australian businesses and enhance security for all Australians?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. And yes, in the last week we've had visits from the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Indonesia, and they've underlined our strong relations with both countries. Now, at the moment we see people in Australia and indeed elsewhere in the world wanting to go down into that dark alley, that dead end of protectionism, which we know will cost jobs and opportunities for Australians. And I'm proud to say, Mr Speaker, that we were able, in the discussions with President Widodo, to secure a continued commitment to open markets and more access for Australian exporters in Indonesia, a commitment to conclude the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership, a free trade deal, by the end of this year, and an immediate outcome to reduce tariffs on the export of Australian sugar to Indonesia, to reduce those tariffs to the ASEAN standard of 5%. This will create more opportunities, more markets for Australian cane growers and, of course, access to great high-quality Australian sugar for Indonesian industry. In addition to that, Mr Speaker, we've reached agreement with the Indonesian President to increase the weight, increase the length of export permits and increase the age range for Australian cattle to be able to be exported to Australia, to Indonesia. And again, what that does is create more opportunities, more jobs for the cattle industry in Australia. It is yet again another step in the direction of more markets. We are such a great exporting nation. So many of Australians' jobs depend on exports. On our side, we are committed to more trade, more open markets. Those opposite may sing the siren song of protectionism. It is a dead end. That's the way to poverty. Open markets, more trade and more jobs. And Mr Speaker, on the security side, we agreed with the President to the full resumption of defence cooperation, vital importance as we enhance our maritime cooperation, as we work together with Indonesia to make the region safe and to fight against terrorism. And, Mr Speaker, in terms of the visit from Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, we focused on counter-terrorism, we focused on our cooperation, on security, but also on the enormous economic opportunities for more collaboration between Australia and Israel, especially in the field of innovation and technology. We have a long and strong history together between Australia and Israel, and it is acquiring a massive, innovative, technological dimension which we will exploit as we work together to create the jobs and the opportunities of the 21st century.
The member for Gordon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why is the Prime Minister standing by and doing absolutely nothing to stop nearly 700,000 Australians from having their pay cut by up to $77 a week?
The Prime Minister has the call. The member for Gilmore.
Mr Speaker, there was a time when the honourable member's leader, and I suspect the honourable member himself, supported the independent umpire, the Fair Work Commission. And the Leader of the Opposition has been so eloquent, Mr Speaker, it would take days to go through his defence of the Fair Work Commission. On Leon Pyne, 17th of May last year, the best defence workers have is a strong independent umpire. That's not bad. Or what about in Brisbane on the 1st of June? I've got full confidence in the independent umpire maintaining our penalty rate structure. Penalty rates were first introduced in Australia through the application of unions representing workers and arbitrated by the independent umpire. And the improvements have always come through the independent umpire. And then the same day, he says the idea that if you took away the independent umpire, that somehow miraculously you trusted Parliament to set the conditions in every Australian workplace, he said that would be providing a loaded gun for a future Conservative government to radically reduce conditions in Australia. Well,
the Prime Minister will resume his seat. Members on my right. Prime Minister will resume his seat for a second. Members on my right. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, Mr Speaker, the question asks the Prime Minister what he's doing. If the answer is nothing, he should sit down.
Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Leader of the House will cease interjecting, as will the Foreign Minister. The Prime Minister is completely in order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, in terms of dealing with penalty rates, from our side of politics, we believe the Fair Work Commission is the independent umpire. It should make the decisions and we should respect them. That used to be the position on the other side. Apparently in January, according to the member for McMahon, the Leader of the Opposition had some sort of thought-cleansing experience where suddenly he was reprogrammed. I think it was the CFMEU. I thank my friend for the inspiration there. That's undoubtedly what it was. But of course there is enormous experience on the other side of the House with trading away penalty rates. In fact, they're dab hands at it, Mr Speaker. We've talked about Clean Event, the 2006 EBA, which was with the AWU, that specifically excluded penalty rates, public holiday pay, overtime and shift loading. It was saving, by 2010, Clean Event $2 million a year in wages. That was a pretty good deal for the company. And, Mr Speaker, it entered into a 1998 EBA with the AWU, which saved up to $400 million to 2004 after removing night shift penalties and weekend loadings. And so, Mr Speaker, a lot of experience trading away penalty rates there with the Leader of the Opposition. Chiquita mushrooms, Cirque du Soleil, it's a long list, Mr Speaker. He is an absolute expert in trading away penalty rates. He used to be an authority on respecting the independent umpire, but now, I'm afraid, Mr Speaker, he's been reprogrammed.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Barton is warned. The member for Gorton can just wait a second while I deal with a few members of the House, if that's okay. You can stand there and wait or resume your seat, whenever you like. The member for Bendigo interjects consistently. If someone were to transcribe the member for Bendigo's interjections through that answer, it would come to about half the total of the Prime Minister's words. The member for Bendigo will not interject for the rest of question time. The member for Bendigo won't interject now. She is warned, as is the member for Griffith once again. The member for Gorton.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I am, Mr Speaker, seeking leave to table an article from the Sydney Morning Herald that indicates that up to $77 cut for each worker, up to 650,000 workers.
The member for Swan.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update on what the government is doing to ensure that energy is affordable and reliable for Australian businesses and households, including my electorate of Swan?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. He knows very well that Australian businesses are under pressure with rising costs, just as Australian families are, and no costs are rising faster than energy costs and electricity costs in particular. Mr Speaker, we can best support Australian families, Australian businesses like those I visited this morning in Hume, not far from here, by ensuring that they have affordable and reliable electricity. Now, the greatest threat to that affordable and reliable electricity are the reckless policies of the Australian Labor Party. And they're not just a theoretical threat, Mr Speaker. We've seen exactly what happens in South Australia. We've seen there, with an enormous renewable energy target, with no planning to integrate that renewable energy into the grid, no consideration given to transmission or storage, no consideration given to baseload power other than shutting it down, and the result has been the most expensive and the least reliable energy in Australia. Mr Speaker, these costs of electricity have been skyrocketing. A car mechanic in Ipswich has seen their power bill doubled from $5,000 a year to $10,000. A hairdresser in Western Sydney seen a power bill go from $2,200 to $4,800. Now, the businesses I met with today in Hume with the Minister for Energy and Senator Zazelja included a bottle maker, Bottles of Australia, who said energy is around 9% of the cost of running their business. They are an exporter. They are dealing at the margin competitively, dealing in cents of advantage per bottle. Doubling their electricity cost over the last decade, 20% rises foreshadowed in the ACT. That undermines their competitiveness. One of the other small businesses there said that the cost in electricity that was foreshadowed was going to result in him having to lay off workers. We saw another business there who operates a data centre, Mr Speaker. Energy costs for them is 20% of their overhead. They are in a competitive business both within Australia and internationally. How do they continue to compete if energy costs keep on rising and rising? Labor has no plan for this other than an ideological commitment to renewable energy without any plan for integration. We are taking an all-of-the-above approach, a rational approach, business-like, based on engineering and economics. We're committed to storage, transmission, affordable and reliable power.
Has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In April of last year, the Prime Minister legislated to overturn the decision of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, the independent umpire for safe rates in the trucking industry. And then in October of last year, the Prime Minister again legislated to preempt a decision of the Fair Work Commission in relation to the Country Fire Authority. So why is the Prime Minister now refusing to legislate to stop this pay cut to 700,000 Australians?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, April was a notable month last year because that was the month in which the Leader of the Opposition gave his absolutely unqualified, unequivocal pledge to Neil Mitchell that he would support, commit to, abide by the decision of the Fair Work Commission on penalty rates. He was given every opportunity to find some wriggle room. He was given every opportunity to change his mind, but he committed to it. And that is the point. Now, he knows, as well as every other member here, every other former union organiser on their side of the House, every small business former owner in this House, everybody knows that there is a trade-off between high penalty rates on weekends and ordinary rates during the rest of the week, conditions during the rest of the week. And there is also the question of how many jobs are going to be available. I mean, you have Ian Ross, the President of the Fair Work Commission, a lifelong official of the Australian Congress of Trade Unions, one of the most highly respected trade union officials, put on there by the Labor Party, who justified the reduction in Sunday penalty rates. How? Because he said it will make more jobs available on weekends. That means there'll be more jobs available on weekends, particularly for younger people. It'll mean business owners will not have to operate their business themselves. They'll be able to take people on. There'll be more jobs, more hours. The Retail Traders Association estimates another 40,000 jobs that would be available. So that was the decision. Now, Mr Speaker, it's obviously a long and complex examination, thousands of pages of evidence, hundreds of witnesses. Cosboa would have been funded by the Labor Party if they'd had the chance, but they didn't win the 2013 election. So all of that evidence was considered by the independent tribunal. And just as Jenny George said in her letter to the Australian last week,
the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the member for Whitlam,
said, former President of the ACTU, the Leader of the Opposition was right to support the independence of the umpire during the election. He was right to commit to supporting it, but he's wrong now, because he should be careful what he wishes for, because the foundation of the industrial relations system in Australia has been an independent umpire. The Labor Party has fought for that for years. They've defended it for years, and now it's suited their purposes to throw it aside. Now, as far, I might say in conclusion, Mr Speaker, as far as the RSRT is concerned, its abolition was always our policy. Always our policy, and we carried it out.
The Treasurer. Member for Gilmore. The member for Melbourne.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, news poll today should be no surprise. Young people are getting screwed over. Owning a home's out of reach, study is getting more expensive, work is getting more insecure, and now many young people's wages will be cut after the Fair Work Commission decision, cheered on by your government, to cut their penalty rates. Last year, the Greens announced our plan to protect penalty rates in legislation, and we're pleased that others are now on board. Prime Minister, will you now join with the rest of the parliament in protecting the wages of hundreds of thousands of Australians, especially our youngest and lowest paid workers, by backing the Greens bill? Wouldn't it be better to spend this week protecting young people's wages instead of giving the big banks a multi-billion-dollar handout?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, I'm going to allow the question, but caution the member for Melbourne about the use of language in his question, being unparliamentary or at least certainly unsavoury, and I've cautioned him on that before. If there is a repeat of it, I'll simply sit the member for Melbourne down. This is made more difficult by the change to the standing orders, of course, that gives 45 seconds for long speeches rather than 30, but that's beyond my control. But I do say to the member for Melbourne, if there's a repeat of that, I'll simply sit him down and move to the next question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can understand the member for Melbourne's unhappiness that the plagiarism of the Greens' policy by the Labor Party has not been acknowledged. But it is yet another example of the green tail wagging the Labor dog, I think, Mr Speaker. But Mr Speaker, the honourable member, I've addressed this issue in my previous answers, but I'll take the opportunity to quote the observation of President Ian Ross. This is the former Australian Congress of Trade Unions official appointed to head Fair Work by the Labor Party, as were the other four members of the panel. And this is what he said. The evidence also supports the proposition that a lower Sunday penalty rate would increase service levels with a consequent increase in employment in terms of hours worked by existing employees or the engagement of new employees. In particular, a reduction in Sunday penalty rates is likely to lead to more stores being open on Sundays, increased Sunday trading hours, a reduction in hours by some owner-operators, an increase in overall hours worked in retail stores. Now, Mr Speaker, that is the conclusion after, as I said earlier, several years, thousands of pages of evidence, hundreds of witnesses by the Independent Tribunal. They were tasked with this job by the former Labor government. They had all of the evidence from employers and employees. They considered it very carefully. Honourable members would understand, and sure the member for Melbourne would understand, that there was always a balance between the rate of penalty rates and its impact on employment. It's clearly a contentious matter. You have an independent body has determined it. They've considered it carefully. They've come to the conclusion. The Labor Party previously said we must respect the independent umpire and suggested we would not. Well, we do, and we have. It is the Labor Party that has changed. We respect the independent umpire's decision. They've made the decision, and honourable members opposite, and indeed the honourable member for Melbourne, should bear in mind what Jenny George said. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for when you decide that independent tribunals' judgments are only to be respected when they suit your own preconceived views.
Just before I call the member for Durack, I'd also like to inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon a parliamentary delegation from Laos. On behalf of the House, extend a very warm welcome to all of you here. The member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on action the government is taking to reduce the cost of living pressures for hard-working Australians? How are government policies giving Australian families the opportunities they need to get ahead?
Members on my left. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Durack for her question and, like all members on this side of the House, for their concern and acknowledgement of the very real challenges that Australians are facing as we move from the mining investment boom, Mr Speaker, through to ensuring that Australians can look forward with confidence in the future of our economy. We are in our 26th year of economic growth. That has not occurred by accident, Mr Speaker. It has occurred as a result of the hard work of Australians, of businesses, of employees and others who have delivered a generation of prosperity that this country has never known before. And the way you continue to ensure that prosperity remains in place is you do a number of things which this government is doing, Mr Speaker. And the first of those is to ensure that we continue to attract the investment into business, into enterprises, into products that provide the jobs and provide the wages that Australians can rely on in the future. So our enterprise tax plan, Mr Speaker, our infrastructure plan, just alone on reducing the compliance costs for business, which the Minister for Small Business will know, we have reduced the compliance costs for business, in particular small business, in this country by $5.8 billion every year ongoing. $5.8 billion. And these are the sorts of initiatives that ensure that we are able to drive business growth which supports jobs. Now, on top of that, Mr Speaker, it is this government that ensured in this year's budget that we have put 500,000 Australians in the place where they do not go into the second highest tax bracket. It is this government that has actually reduced personal income taxes for Australians who are earning ordinary average real-time earnings. Ordinary average real-time earnings, and we have ensured that they have not gone into the second highest tax bracket. It is this side of the House that has been seeking to ensure affordable childcare for Australian families now for years, and the only ones who have stood in the way of that is those who sit opposite the Labor Party. Because, Mr Speaker, those in the Labor Party do not understand that if you want to invest in new services, that you have to be able to pay for them. Now, this side of the House understands that. They have stood in the way of more affordable childcare, Mr Speaker, now for several years. Now they have the opportunity to turn that around in these last few sitting weeks before the budget, and I would encourage them to do that. And I know Australian families would like them to do that, and they would be encouraging them to do exactly that. But it's not just that, it's the cost of energy as well, as the Prime Minister, I think, has rightly pointed out. Households, Mr Speaker, households are facing higher energy costs because of the mindless pursuit of ideological policies by Labor state governments, Mr Speaker. And those opposite share those policies. Now, on this side of the House, we embrace all forms of energy, whether it is coal or wind, Mr Speaker, or any of the forms of energy that will deliver more affordable prices for householders and business.
The Treasurer's time has concluded. Member for McMahon might settle down, actually. The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many women will have their pay cut because of the penalty rates decision, and what will this do to the gender pay gap in Australia?
Hear.
The Prime Minister has the call.
You have got both. Yeah, no, Mr Speaker, there are approximately 600,000 workers affected, and there's over 600,000. And my my information is that the gender balance between the two in the retail trade sector is 55.5% female, 44.5% male. In accommodation and food services sector, it is 53.4% female, 46.6% male. While the Fair Work Commission said that it did have regard to this, it noted there was a report, I might say, which suggested that of the hospitality workers who receive penalty rates, 50.7% are male compared to 49.3% who are female. So I'm just quoting from the from the evidence that was being presented. So I'm sure that there's more material in the decision, but overall
the Minister
there
for
are somewhat
Immigration and
more
Border Protection is
females
warned.
and males working in those sectors, but it is not clear that in terms of those who are receiving penalty rates and would be affected by the decision, that the balance is markedly different between men and women. But if I can take the question on notice, provide further information to the honourable member, I'll arrange for the minister to do so.
The member for Murray.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the minister update the House the contributions of Australian dairy sector to the Australian economy? What are the obstacles to the viability of this industry, and the jobs that it creates for the hard-working Australians?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. Note that dairy farming in Shepparton accounts for 22% of Victoria's dairy production and is home to 1,040 of Victoria's 4,711 dairy farms. Australia's dairy industry is a $13 billion industry and manufacturing and export industry, and over 6,000 Australian dairy farms produce close to 10 billion litres of milk each year. It's good to note that after the dairy crisis and working with the industry, that prices are now starting to rise again, and Fonterra's price is over $5 a kilo for milk solids, and it's also noted that the price for Murray Goulburn is raised to $4.95. So we had a substantial increase in the dairy price. It's also interesting to note when the price under Labor was vastly lower than what it was when we called it a crisis, that the Australian Labor Party did absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So the direct impact of what we're seeing, though, in Victoria's Labor's 40% renewable energy target is driving up the costs for electricity producers. Electricity is such a vital component of the production in dairying. We have seen it with their dairy sheds, in their refrigeration. Every section has had to deal with it. We've noted that with one producer, with some of the producers down there, they've noted in Vic Feeds operations, a family-owned stock feed pellet manufacturing mill that supplies dairy farmers in Goulburn Valley and the Gippsland, they're looking at a 151% hike in the cost of their electricity in the next 12 months, 151% hike. And of course, you cannot just keep putting those costs onto business. If you put those costs onto business, the businesses will go out of business. And this is based on, and what we now have with the Australian Labor Party is they're mimicking their state colleagues in South Australia, and we know what the result of that is. We don't have to model what happened in South Australia. It's there for everybody to see. It's a complete fiasco. It's creating immense pressures on business. It's driving people out of work. It's driving manufacturing out of the state. And now we have the Australian Labor Party who seem to not really care about labourers anymore. Because what this will mean, unless they want to change their policy, is they're going to stand behind a policy that they will do to the Australian Commonwealth what the Australian Labor Party has done in South Australia. Now, it's interesting today, and it's been worth noting, that the member for Maribyrnong, the leader of the opposition, has no interest of coming to the dispatch box to defend his party's policy. He's very interested in writing on a piece of paper. He's very interested in not looking at the cameras. He likes to look down, but he doesn't like to look at his own policy. But I think the Australian people want to know what he has to say about his own policy. The Australian people want to know what is going to happen to Australia
the Deputy
under
Prime
his
Minister's
policy,
time
rather
has
than his notes.
expired. The member for Herbert.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. PwC analysis reported in The Australian shows wages in regional Australia have grown 3 times slower than in major cities. Given regional workers are already doing it tough, why is the Deputy Prime Minister supporting pay cuts for regional Australians, including up to 13,000 retail accommodation and food services workers in the electorate of Dawson and up to 16,000 in the electorate of Leichhardt?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call. I remind the member for Lingiari he's already been warned. He was warned earlier in the day during the suspension. Just in case he's forgot, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question, and I must say that it verges on the perverse. Here is the party, the Australian Labor Party, that is going to rip out the heart of the dams policy, take the money away that actually brings about regional jobs, that brings about regional growth. The Australian Labor Party that has no belief in regional development, the Australian Labor Party that did nothing about the construction of the Inland Rail, the Australian Labor Party that stands against decentralisation. In fact, it's the Australian Labor Party that moved for a Senate inquiry to stop the decentralisation of APVMA out of Canberra to a regional area to provide regional jobs. It's the Australian Labor Party that has done nothing for regional work. The Australian Labor Party that out there 100 positive policies, didn't have one for the agricultural industry. The Australian Labor, what is it? The Australian Labor Party? I see the member for Lingiari looking at me. What is the Australian Labor Party going to do for
the Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. I haven't called the member for Herbert yet. I'm just slowing things down a bit. The member for Herbert on a point of order.
Yes. Whilst I appreciate the Deputy Prime Minister's response,
State the point of order. Member for Herbert.
Question that I asked
Member for Herbert will resume her seat. As a frivolous point of order, at no point did she state the point of order. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
I note that the member for Herbert, in the member for Herbert's electorate, right next to it, we are trying to get Hell's Gate Dam built. Hell's Gate Dam. And what has she done to support us on that? What has she done to support the construction of Hell's Gate Dam? The member for Herbert should hang her head in shame because she is letting down the people of Townsville. She has never stood up for Hell's Gate Dam. She has never stood up for the economic growth of Townsville. You have not stood up for them. You are standing in a party that wants to take away the money.
The Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. Member for Hunter resume his seat. The call's on this side. You're not doing anything. I haven't given you the call. You're hoping. That's right. Member for Hunter seeking leave.
I am, Mr Speaker.
Okay, proceed.
I'm seeking leave to table the Australian Labor Party's agriculture policy.
Part
of the 100 policies the Labor Party took with us.
Resume his seat. The member for Barker has the call. Member for Barker has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health and Sport. Will the minister outline to the House why energy security is crucial to providing reliable health care for Australian families? Is the minister aware of any examples where an unreliable energy supply has put the delivery of critical health care services at risk?
The member for Health and Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Barker, who knows that energy security is fundamental to the provision of safety and patient care in our healthcare services and our hospitals. I know myself. I warned on August 17, when I was in South Australia, of the serious and significant risks to their infrastructure from energy security from the South Australian experiment, which the Leader of the Opposition wants to adopt nationally. We know, however, that this has translated to real and significant consequences for the South Australian healthcare system. On February the 8th, during the most recent round of blackouts, what we saw in Millicent and Penola and Murray Bridge and Mount Gambier was that those hospitals were all forced onto backup generators. Those hospitals were all forced onto backup generators. Quite significantly, the South Australian Energy Minister at the time tried to say that critical infrastructure such as hospitals would be exempt from load shedding. It was then up to a South Australian government official to correct it and make the small correction that smaller hospitals and healthcare facilities across South Australia may be affected from time to time. Right. Well, they were. And so 4 significant hospitals and facilities, including the state's largest regional hospital, were forced onto generators. But generators, of course, may not always work in a time of crisis. We saw that on the 28th September blackout, Remember the blackout? That was just a hiccup, according to the member for Port Adelaide. On that day, the Flinders Medical Centre generator failed. What was the consequence of that failure? Embryos waiting to be transferred to a fertility clinic were destroyed as a consequence of that blackout. If there are any members on that side that thinks that that is a hiccup, funny or trivial for those involved, now is your chance to speak up. But it wasn't just Flinders. It was also Port Augusta, where for 5 hours that day the backup generator failed. So the importance of energy security to healthcare is absolutely fundamental, as not just us, but as the South Australian HSU itself said. You remember the HSU, your good friend Craig, to the Leader of the Opposition. What the HSU said is much equipment runs on power. You have oxygen machines, machines taking blood pressure and breathing apparatus that are run by power. There could not be a clearer statement from no less than the HSU why energy security in South Australia is so fundamental to healthcare. They've blown it up at the state level. The Leader of the Opposition wants to do the same at the federal level. He should protect our hospitals and abandon his reckless plan.
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister guarantee the decision to cut penalty rates in the retail and hospitality industries will not lead to the pay of Australians working in other industries being cut? People like nurses who work late nights and weekends caring for the sick and injured. Why won't the Prime Minister support Labor's legislation to protect the penalty rates of all Australians?
Members on my right, the member for Mitchell and the member for Hughes will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member knows very well that the Commission went to great pains to make it very clear that the decision does not affect any awards other than those dealt with in the decision. This is what the honourable member is promoting is yet another reckless scare campaign to frighten Australians. Honourable member knows very well that this decision
the Prime Minister will resume his seat. Prime Minister will resume his seat for a second. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Ballarat has a habit that I've warned her of numerous times of interjecting consistently after she's asked a question. I've called her to order a number of times on that. The level of interjections is too high. I'm not going to keep doing it. The member for Ballarat can leave under 94A. Prime Minister has the call. Prime Minister's concluded his answer. The member for Forrest.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the Minister explain why it's important to have a stable and secure energy supply if we are to maximise the benefits of defence industry boom occurring in Australia as a result of this government's policies?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Forrest for her question. And I can tell that the government's approach to defence and defence industry is certainly bearing the fruit that we had hoped for in terms of creating jobs here in Australia, but also creating the most lethal and capable defence force in Australia's history. Members will remember that the Turnbull government announced a $195 billion build-up of our defence capability over the next 10 years. That will not only give us the most capable and lethal defence force in Australia's history, but we also committed to using that heft of that almost $200 billion investment to grow high-tech, advanced manufacturing, high-value jobs here in the Australian manufacturing sector. And it is certainly bearing fruit, Mr Speaker. Northrop Grumman, for example, has announced a doubling of their workforce from 500 to 1,000 workers in Australia. DCNS, the submarine designer and builder, has already opened its office, employing 50 people in the last 2 months, and that will grow to 2,900 people by the early 2020s, Mr Speaker. BAE is taking on 200 extra engineers over the next couple of years and 100 extra support staff, and that is before the announcements of significant tenders over the next 12 months, which BAE may well win or not win, which will require them to expand their defence force even further. And the ASC, the Australian Submarine Corporation, has doubled its graduate intake in anticipation of the increased work that will be flowing because of the government's continuous naval shipbuild. This is on the back of course, 6 years of absolute inaction by the Labor Party when they're in office in comparison to the 54 vessels that we have committed to in the short period of the coalition government. But, Mr Speaker, the second part of that question asked me about the risks to this massive expansion. And, of course, the supply of energy and the cost of electricity is a very significant risk to being able to expand our manufacturing base. We've already seen that the Department of Defence will have to build $20 million diesel power generator at Osborne to look after the shipyard and the submarine yard, $20 million of taxpayers' money because the state government can't keep the power on in South Australia. So we're already seeing the outcome of Labor's ideological approach rather than our all-of-the-above approach. But recently, Paul O'Malley from BlueScope Steel and Andrew McKenzie from BHP Billiton both specifically warned that the expansion of steel production and the expansion of Olympic Dam is at risk because of a failure to provide stable and cheap power. This is as a result of Labor's ideological obsession with renewable energy.
Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why is this government giving big business a tax cut but doing nothing to stop workers getting a pay cut?
Yeah.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the honourable member must be surprised to find himself asking questions like this, given that my answers invariably involve quoting him.
Exactly.
The case for company tax cuts was made very eloquently by the Leader of the Opposition in this place only a few years ago, when he said that everybody knows that cutting company tax increases investment, productivity, employment, jobs. He made the case. He said everybody knows that's good Labor policy. The member for McMahon was so enamoured of cutting company tax he wrote a book about it. Their hero, Paul Keating, of course, was a master at it too. Mr Speaker, the Labor Party has not got one position advanced in this question time today that is not 180 degrees of the position they took a year or so ago. And turning to penalty rates, Mr Speaker, we have heard again and again from the Leader of the Opposition how important it is to defend the independent umpire. He has waxed eloquent about the independent umpire for years and years, on television, in doorstops, on radio. It's mother's milk to him. He's defended the independence of the independent umpire against the Liberal Party and the National Party. But we were on a unity ticket with him then. We agreed that we should respect the decisions of the independent umpire, but now he wants to abandon it. And now he wants to abandon it, just like he wants to abandon his views on trade. He's become a protectionist. He used to be a free trader. He's now a protectionist. He used to believe in cutting company tax. Now he wants to increase it. He used to believe that the independent umpire, the Fair Work Commission's decisions should be respected. Now he wants to abandon it. Mr Speaker, we have seen a complete backflip by this Leader of the Opposition. And, Mr Speaker, I will, on the theme of the Fair Work Commission, take the opportunity to note, in adding to an answer to a question from the member for Sydney, Mr Speaker, that the Fair Work Commission, honourable member can study the decision herself, of course, concluded that there was no evidence before them which showed the number of retail workers who usually work on Sundays by gender. That was their decision. They suggested the conclusion as far as hospitality workers was, as I indicated earlier, that there were somewhat more male workers receiving penalty rates than female workers. So, but it's the conclusion that they made was that their decision was entirely in conformity with the modern award objective of ensuring equal remuneration.
The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Environment and Energy. Will the minister update the House on the government's actions to ensure an affordable supply of energy for hard-working families and small businesses, including in Dunkley? What hurdles stand in the way to achieving this security?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for his question and acknowledge with 16,000 small businesses in his electorate, whether it's the butcher in Frankston, whether it's the baker in Seaford, or indeed whether it's the candlestick maker in Mornington. They're all paying higher prices for their electricity, and we are committed, the Turnbull government, to driving down the costs of power by reining in the networks through changes to limited merits review, through changing the gas transportation system and pricing arrangements, and by putting in place a realistic and practicable renewable energy target. Now, I'm asked about any hurdles. Now, we know that last week the Leader of the Opposition doubled down when it came to his reckless 50% renewable energy target. He doesn't know how much it costs, he doesn't know what it's called, and he doesn't know how it's going to work. Because this is what the member for Sydney said on the 14th of February. It's a 50% ambition. This is what the member for Watson said on the 16th of February. It's generally referred to as a goal. This is what the member for McMahon said on the 16th of February. We're all being very clear and explicit about a policy objective, Mr Speaker. And then this is what the member for Hunter said on Sky. It's not a policy, it's an announcement of an aspiration. Yeah, you have to have goals in life, Mr Speaker. Now, we know the Leader of the Opposition went on the 7:30 report and said if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That's what he famously said. But this has to take the cake, because in his speech to Bloomberg last week on the 50% renewable energy target, this is what he said. This is our target, it is our goal, it is our objective, it is our aspiration, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, then went on to say, and I'll quote him, he said, "It's not something we will need to legislate because we are confident Australians will achieve it." And I thought, that's strange. That's strange because what did he say to the Australian people less than a year ago at the election? 24 million Australian people. What did he say? And I discovered the Labor Party election document on page 15. Quote, "A Labor government will ensure that the implementation of these reforms through Commonwealth law and legislation relating to the 2030 target of 50% renewable energy generation," Mr Speaker. So there you go. You've actually contradicted your own policy document less than a year ago. You contradict the member for McMahon, you contradict the member for Sydney, you contradict the member for Watson, and you're giving up on 16,000 small businesses in the electorate of Dunkley and many others because you are putting your ideology ahead of the practical reality.
The member for Burt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Premier of Western Australia has said, and I quote, "What I would like to see is reduce those excessive Sunday penalty rates." Does the Prime Minister support the Premier's statement? Doesn't the Prime Minister's refusal to take action show that cutting penalty rates is now his government's policy?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I assume the honourable member would take the view that if the government didn't move to legislate to fix interest rates following a Reserve Bank decision, that meant that we agreed with the Reserve Bank's decision on monetary policy. The honourable member's attempt to make some facile point about the Fair Work Commission does not do him justice or this House. He knows very well that this is a complex issue, the determination of the conditions of modern awards and the review of modern awards. It was the government of his party, a Labor government, that gave that task to the Fair Work Commission. It was worked through assiduously and carefully. Arguments were made by unions and by employers. Thousands of pages of evidence were considered. A decision was arrived at, which we respect. But we respect the honourable member is a member of a party that claimed to support the independent umpire in determining wages and conditions, but now wants to throw it over in the manner that his leader said would be extraordinarily dangerous to do only last year. There has been a complete and utter backflip undertaken by the Labor Party on this. This is rank populism. They failed to take into account a long-standing tradition of the Labor Party and a commitment to supporting the independent umpire. We support the independent umpire, and so should honourable members opposite.
The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The member for Burt will resume his seat, as will the member for Gorton, and the member for Boothby has the call.
The question is to the Minister for Small Business. Will the Minister update the House on the importance of reliable and affordable energy and how this creates the environment small businesses need to get ahead? What barriers are creating uncertainty and threatening job creation for hard-working Australian businesses and families?
The Minister for Small Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question. This is a vital issue for small business throughout South Australia, and I know this is an issue about which the member for Boothby and all South Australian MPs on this side of the House are very concerned, Mr Speaker. I travelled to South Australia last week with the member for Boothby and visited several of her electorates, 9,285 small businesses. In Adelaide and throughout South Australia, the issue of power cost and reliability is not ideological. It is not a hiccup, as the member for Port Adelaide would have you believe. These are real people with real stories. Small business, not those opposite would seem to care nor understand, actually employs people. Good people. It actually creates jobs and opportunities for Australia, and it makes and sells goods and services our community needs and wants. And all it needs, Mr Speaker, is power. Power. Affordable, reliable, secure, available power. The member and I met Ben and Marika Poland from 53 Espresso in a local shopping centre. They want to invest, they want to grow. They own a newsagent and a coffee shop, and they want to have a go. But the blackouts and the inconsistent supply, Mr Speaker, of power are a handbrake. You can't come to work not knowing if you'll have power, Ben says. This is a first world country, quite right. Ben and Marika aren't alone either. I met a financial planner in Adelaide, Mark Draper from Gem Capital. His office, yes, his small business in the financial planning sector just down the road from the member for Adelaide, now relies on a diesel backup generator to keep the lights on and the work flowing. Would you believe it? A financial planner having to rely on a diesel backup generator. This sorry story for small business just doesn't stop in the suburbs of Adelaide, Mr Speaker. I also went to Murray Bridge with the member for Barker. Last week we visited Farm Fresh Greengrocer on Adelaide Road and met Carlo and Tracy D. Michelle. Now, they sell fresh fruit, vegetables in the Murraylands, as well as bread, condiments, flours, cheese and dips. The member for Maribyrnong knows all about dips because his personal approving rating has had a number of dips lately. A family business, dedicated and hard-working, with local staff and attention to detail for food orders, which has served the community well for more than 15 years. But skyrocketing power prices puts Farm Fresh on the back foot, and that's only when the power works, Mr Speaker. Now, 8 blackouts in recent memory and intermittent power has left Farm Fresh in the dark, counting the costs of Labor's ideological approach to energy, Mr Speaker, just like thousands of small businesses across South Australia. Tracy told the member for Barker and I how everything from the fridges to the freezers, the FBOS machines and email goes down when the power goes off. Now they've had to dump thousands of dollars of stock, and you might laugh, but that's a big hit to their bottom line. That's a big hit to the bottom line. Is that the future we want? I would argue no. All the member for Maribyrnong wants to do is take us back to the dark age.
Members on my left. The member for Gorton has the call.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given the Assistant Minister to the Treasurer has said young Australians should get a high-paying job to buy their first home, why is the government now standing by and doing nothing while the wages of young Australians are being cut?
The members on both sides, the member for Hume, the Minister for Defence Industry representing the Minister for Employment.
Exactly, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, not content with his first crime against the truth, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is now attempting another crime against the truth. They say that, of course, the first crime is always the hardest, and after that it gets a lot easier. And in the election campaign, we saw the ludicrous Medi-Scare campaign, his crime against the truth, frightening old ladies by having CFMEU union thugs ringing them at 9:30 at night, telling them lies about what we were going to do or not do to Medicare. And now we're seeing the Leader of the Opposition in an act of extreme audacity. And we have to admire his capacity for audaciousness, Mr Speaker, because this is the man, Mr Speaker, who, when he had the opportunity, when he was Secretary of the AWU, he used that opportunity to routinely trade away the penalty rates of the people that he represented in the most low-paid jobs in Australia, like cleaners, like people who work for Chiquita Mushrooms, like people who worked in the circus, Mr Speaker. He didn't just do this once or twice. It became a very routine habit, Mr Speaker. For the clean event workers, he did it twice. In 1998 and 2006, he signed EBAs that traded away their penalty rates. With Chiquita Mushrooms, he did it in 2001 and 2004, trading away
the Leader
their
of the House
penalty
will
rates.
resume his seat for a second. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. On direct relevance, we're now halfway through the answer and the minister's yet to refer to government policy and why they're not taking any action.
Just before, I'm going to rule on the point of order, if that's okay. I thank the Manager of Opposition Business. It's fair to say that the Minister is very close to the line. He might even be leaning over the line. But the question had two aspects to it. It had housing affordability and pay cuts referring to penalty rates, and so he's in order, just.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And of course, I'm in order because, Mr Speaker, the question was about cuts to wages and penalty rates. And what I'm pointing out is that this Leader of the Opposition has form when it comes to ripping away the penalty rates of workers. I'm not reflecting on you, Mr Speaker. I couldn't agree with you more. I am in order, and I remain in order, Mr Speaker. So with the Cirque du Soleil, he did it in 2001. With Melbourne and Olympic Parks Trusts, he traded away the penalty rates of workers in 2001 and 2003, and cut and fill engineering in 2003 and 5 on 9 separate occasions. As Secretary of the AWU, he signed away the penalty rates of workers, Mr Speaker. And worse than that, he did it in the case of Clean Event for membership lists.
The Minister's time has concluded.
And
the member for Gorton.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I seek leave to table an article where the Assistant Treasurer says that you need to get a highly paid job to buy a home. It's an article in the Australian.
The member for Gorton doesn't have leave. I'm going to look. I'm being leaning on this to keep things moving. I've made it clear before that where documents are freely publicly available, I'm not inclined to even ask for leave. Certainly that applies to parliamentary papers to Hansard. I think it applies to newspaper articles, which don't really need to be tabled for people to access them. The member for Ford.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister update the House on how the government is maximising job opportunities for hard-working Australians? Why is it important to ensure Australia has a well-managed migration program?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Ford for his question. And he is a champion of small business. He's a great local member and he defends small businesses. He wants to create extra jobs for young Australians in his electorate, and he should be commended for it. In fact, every person, Mr Speaker, on this side of the House wants to grow business so that they can employ more young Australians, more Australians into those jobs. But I can report to the House, Mr Speaker, that in terms of 457 visa holders, the number has fallen by around 13,000 since this government came to office in September of 2013. And we have put into action our words, Mr Speaker. We have said that we want to put Australians first and that we want to put Australians into jobs, and that is the policy of this government. Now, if you look, Mr Speaker, at the words and the actions of this Leader of the Opposition, it is very hard to reconcile the two, because he says one thing to the Australian public and he does the complete opposite. He does the complete opposite because he is a well-known fraud, not only in this place, but across workplaces across the country.
The Minister will withdraw.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker. The point about this Leader of the Opposition is that you can't look at his words, you need to have a look at his actions. Because what happened was, when he was the Employment Minister in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, the 457 visas ballooned during his period of leadership. And you need to look at what he's saying in this question time and in the public at the moment in relation to penalty rates, because it's interesting to note that in relation to the clean event circumstance, Mr Speaker, where he was in the AWU at the time, he presided over an arrangement where casual cleaning workers were paid $18.14 an hour. When under the award,
Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on direct relevance, the Minister for Immigration has now gone completely off the question. He's responding to a note the Deputy Prime Minister just handed him that is nothing to do with what's been asked.
I'll keep listening to the Minister. I think the Minister's in order, but I will listen carefully for the remaining minute. Members on my left don't help by interjecting when the Manager of Opposition Business has made a point of order on their behalf, and I'm seeking to address the matter. The Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I was asked about job opportunities for hard-working Australians. The reality is, when this Leader of the Opposition was a union boss pretending to protect workers, he did the complete opposite. He presided over an arrangement in relation to Clean Event where those workers were entitled to $50.17 per hour under the award. The deal that he brokered as the union leader, pretending to represent the interests of those workers, ended in those workers being paid $18.14 an hour. Now, this man, Mr Speaker, is the great false pretender of Australian politics. The Australian public is seeing through him, and they have seen in relation to 457 visas, where he pretends to be the friend of workers. He is the complete opposite. He's been involved in deal after deal after deal, where workers have come off second best. It's a case in relation to 457 visas, and certainly it was the case, Mr Speaker, when he was a trade union leader.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On indulgence, I wish to have spoken to the Leader of the Opposition about this. I wish to offer the condolences of the Parliament to the loved ones of those killed in Victoria's worst civil aviation accident in 30 years. On Tuesday, the 21st of February, just after 9 o'clock in the morning, a Beechcraft Super King Air crashed shortly after takeoff from Essendon Airport. The plane had been chartered by 4 visitors from the United States and was flown by Max Quatermain, an Australian pilot with over 38 years of flying experience. It was a once-in-a-lifetime trip, cut tragically short. Mr Speaker, nobody on board survived the impact. We thank the first responders who once again selflessly and heroically rushed to the scene. To them we offer our deepest gratitude and respect. They, again and again, Australians show their finest selves in their first response to these terrible incidents and accidents. Now, Mr Speaker, the authorities will continue their investigation into the circumstances of the accident, and our thoughts and prayers are with the family and the friends of those who died, both here in Australia and in the United States. And on behalf of the Parliament and all Australians, we offer our sincere sympathies.
The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
I thank the Prime Minister for his words. My electorate borders 3 parts of the Essendon Airport are west, south and east. We got the news, social media, the way that bad news does, it seems to get out pretty quickly. The pictures of the plume of smoke, very dense, oily and black. And of course, as the Prime Minister said, it was the death of 4 American tourists, golfers, and to King Island. Their families had to be informed at the Hyatt Hotel by the police, just as the news is still all breaking. And of course, the pilot, Max Quartermain, very experienced. Very experienced. It's a terrible tragedy. I know where the plane crashed. It's where we shop. It's where my family goes sometimes, as I know other members would at the Essendon DFO. The area has had plane crashes in the past. Matthews Avenue, where a family was killed. There's been another near miss. The Australian Transport Safety Board, and I thank both my Shadow Minister and the Minister for Transport for keeping us informed, is going to investigate. The coroner is going to investigate. It was a catastrophic failure. The plane got up to about 200 feet and a mayday was issued and a bank left, and we'll find out as best we can what happened from the experts. But what I also want to just say here is that plane crashes are very uncommon, but when they do, I think they have an impact on communities, which is much more perhaps than other tragedies, because we fly, we can imagine it happening, we can imagine shopping near airports. I also want to say that on that morning I also thought of the Prime Minister. These things bring back memories. So I congratulate the first responders. All Australians express our sympathies to the families and to the families of the pilot as well. If that DFO, if that had happened an hour later, that's a very crowded. So I don't know if that's if there can be any solace taken from that, but the first responders are outstanding, and I hope that we find out what happened. But today it's about condolences. May they rest in peace.
I thank the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask the